Konami's Silent Hill series is known for being among the atmospheric and self-paced glory video games to date. In all of these series' release, the games have sold millions of copies worldwide, acquiring a fairly large and faithful following. Silent Hill 3's story centers around a young girl named Heather, who wakes up from a dream in a mall at a closing time and finds herself confronted by a man claiming to be looking for her. This detective, Douglas, claims to know something about Heather, and she blows him off in the normal way by walking into the women's bathroom. Shortly after, she runs into every stranger, woman named Claudia, who proves to be adept at scaring teenagers. As this time wears on in the mall, Heather finds herself encountering nightmares, creatures as her surroundings deteriorate into a very similar parallel of a dark Silent Hill. The strange thing, she's not even in the town yet. The fact she doesn't arrive in Silent Hill about halfway through the story. As the story progresses, Heather has this strange connection with Silent Hill, and what is Claudia after? Silent Hill 3 continues the trend of mixed video games. The exploration and puzzle elements are top-notch as usual, with 3 levels of difficulty from easy to expert. On easy, the answers to the riddles are basically spoon-fed to you, and there are fewer items required to solve puzzles, and they're also generally easy to find. Medium is a comfortable midway, where a lot of riddles and puzzles are fairly challenging, but they won't crush your morals with ludicrous difficulty. Expert difficulty, in a layman's term, is not the fate of heart. These are the kinds of riddles and puzzles that induce hair pulling almost on the same level as Karen's missed 4 revelations. To offer up an example, one of the puzzles on medium requires you to place Shakespearean works on a shelf into the right to order reveal combination to a lock. On expert difficulty, you're required to read a complex riddle from the Shakespearean plays and place them in order regarding the clues about the story. Clearly not for those lacking patience. You might expect you especially have to explore each area twice due to the sudden transformation between a normal area and a dark version of a same area. Unfortunately, this isn't nearly as bad as it sounds, because the dark version is almost completely different from its normal counterpart in that completely different areas are unlocked. Normally, this transition almost only happens once you've fully explored a normal area and solved all its puzzles. Sadly, you might also miss some of the better items like the katana or the submachine gun if you're not careful. But again, a lot of this game is about exploring every crevice of every room to find the items and clues in order to advance. This might sound tedious to some, but it's actually quite nicely blended in so that it doesn't necessarily feel like you're being dragged back and forth just to find one clue in that room you've been through 18 times already. One area late in the game even mixes things up by randomly switching between dark and regular Silent Hill as you move between rooms, occasionally throwing power enemies at you, further increasing anxiety upon entering a new room. Silent Hill 3 isn't particularly a long game. Doubled explosions aside, you can probably complete the game's main story in about 8 to 10 hours, or perhaps more, depending on the difficulty or how you approach the monsters. Luckily, there are multiple endings, as has become typical of the Silent Hill series, and depending on how you play through the story, you'll get a different ending. When you complete certain conditions during the game, you'll also be able to unlock new weapons and outfits for Heather. Most of these don't do much aside from making things extremely easy. The issue, though, with how the game handles this time is lack of exploration of Silent Hill itself. Upon the arrival in the haunted house, you'll find most of it's blocked off. Unlike in the first installments, in which players were encouraged to explore as much of the town as possible for the item clues and few surprised enemies. This step down from the original element of exploration doesn't exactly bring down the game by a ton, but it does make a few great deal for restriction and linear, as if Konami decided they were going to take control of where players went into their own hands and basically forced themselves to certain places in a specific order. Even so, exploration in the area themselves is pretty well done, and there are even a few optional items, like a taser and a silencer, and even body armor. All three found pretty early in the game and having their own unique uses. Let's face it, though Silent Hill has never had great combat, and Silent Hill 3 is no exception. The combat feels awkward at times, and the camera tends to get in the way of it all the time. In the way the sluggish and unwieldy attacks Heather unleashes with her vast array of weapons might be attributed to the fact that she's an average person who doesn't actually know how to fight monsters and has been shoved into horrific situations by circumstance, but can't always account for the fact that she's swinging at chest level to hit an enemy that's crawling at her feet. That's just one of the few instances that give the impression that Konami could have tried a little harder. Even with the shortcomings of the combat and camera, it's evident that the combat could have been a lot worse. There are even some ways they circumvent getting into actual fights. You'll find pieces of jerky throughout the game that can be used as bait to allow you to sneak by monsters without having to fight or step in traps and get dropped on them and land a few extra shots with your gigantic maul or shotgun. From a graphical standpoint, Silent Hill 3 is one of the best looking games on the PlayStation 2, hands down. The character models look great, the facial expressions and movements make all the little details of their skin and their outfits. In one of the cutscenes, Douglas and Heather are diving to Silent Hill. There's a rain running down the windows of the car as they go, and the effects just look brilliant. Despite a few minor blemishes here and there, like awkward movements of hair or object being moved, the cutscenes are fantastically rendered and animated without having to resort to abuse the first-person shooter movie sequences like so many other games. The town of Silent Hill has never looked better in spite of the streets you'll be seeing. New and familiar enemies screech and groan as they spiral and shamble their way about the town. The textures have seen a noticeable improvement since Silent Hill 2, and the objects and enemies look a little more real, or surreal, as they fade into out of the mist. To be frank, some of the animations in the combat graphics do look a little shanky, and seem to abruptly come to halt rather than slowly winding down. Swinging the maul, mostly the others don't look too bad when it happens. It's not something that bothers most people, but there are a couple jittery movements in which it really shows. Again, Akira Yakamura proves the music for Silent Hill title, and again, he doesn't disappoint. Silent Hill 3's soundtrack is a huge departure from the grunge sound of Silent Hill 2 and the MIDI soundtrack used in Silent Hill. Instead, it's now a bit more industrial sounding, with stronger use of heavy sound effects and ambient noise. Even with the shift, the soundtrack manages to sound incredibly varied, and a lot of the songs even borrow elements from the previous titles, and it's nice to see a couple of tracks that almost seem like homages to the past entries. Another new aspect is that there are vocals in a good portion of the tracks now. The game's main opening and ending themes sport vocals from the different singers, and another track plays during the game's story featuring vocals. The only thing that some might consider negative about this soundtrack is that there are also significantly fewer songs on the 3 soundtracks than in 2 and 1, though 3 is a bit shorter than the other 2, so that's understandable. It's hard to call Silent Hill 3 the best in the series, considering it's not much of an expansion upon the series, except in the story. The game offers a lot more insight as the events of the first game, and only fewer and only vaguely hints at the second game. And even though it's short, there's a lot of a challenge to be had, mode depending. Should definitely look for this one if they haven't played it already. Silent Hill 3 gets an 8.8 out of 10. This is Red Wolf signing out, and I'll see you next time. Peace.